Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. There are decisions that don't echo with the sound of parliamentary gavels, that don't flood the headlines or primetime news. But when history looks back, it will recognize these quiet moments as the turning points when a nation silently changed course. Canada's defense pivot is one of those decisions. No fanfare, no showmanship, but deep enough to touch the very core of a question we've avoided for decades. How much control do we truly have over our own security? For years, public debate was swept up in familiar arguments. Is the F-35 good or not good enough? Expensive or outrageously expensive? How stealthy is it? How powerful are its sensors? These noisy debates drowned out a much more important issue: the nature of dependency. When you own an advanced tool but don't hold the final say over how it operates, it's not full ownership. It's long-term borrowing in a far more sophisticated form. Canada has long grown used to the role of the reliable partner. We comply, we contribute, we procure according to the alliance's shared standards. But in a world order that is shifting fast, where geopolitical competition is spilling into forgotten frontiers, being reliable is no longer enough to guarantee safety, especially when the Arctic, Canada's strategic lifeline, is melting, both literally and politically. Up there, response time is measured in minutes. Distances span thousands of kilometers, and any delay, no matter how small, can become a strategic void that no one can fill. In that context, the real question is no longer which aircraft is more advanced, but which aircraft truly belongs to us. That's why the decision to choose 88 Swedish Gripen jets isn't just a technical choice. It's a quiet but clear statement that Canada no longer wants to be just an operator in a system controlled by others. That we have learned the lessons of history, from the Avro era to the long decades of living under the technological shadow of bigger allies. The Gripen enters this story as a symbol of clarity, not flashy, not dressed up in sweeping global promises. It embodies a philosophy that's distinctly Scandinavian, and distinctly Canadian too. Take ownership of what you use, know your limits well, and build capability based on geography, climate, and national interest, not distant assumptions. And right here, as the veneer of slogans begins to fall away, an unavoidable question comes into sharper focus. If the Gripen is an answer to the desire for autonomy, then what does the F-35 truly represent in Canada's defense model? To understand why this pivot became inevitable, we must confront the systemic crisis embedded within the F-35 model, where cost, dependence, and the risk of strategic paralysis intersect in an equation Canada no longer wishes to solve in the old way. Once the media halo is stripped away, the F-35 no longer appears as a symbol of absolute power, but rather as a heavy, expensive structure increasingly revealing its systemic weaknesses. For years, the F-35 was marketed as the backbone of 21st century air forces, but real-world operations tell a different story, quieter and far more uncomfortable. It's a story of uncontrollable cost escalation, of invisible technological entanglements, and of a combat capability that could be neutralized not by an adversary, but by the very architecture it was built upon. Cost is the first and most visible blow. The initial purchase price of the F-35 fluctuates constantly, but the true budget drain lies in what follows: the cost of operation, maintenance, and upgrades throughout its life cycle. Every flight hour of the F-35 burns through a figure high enough to make any finance minister furrow their brow. When questions about efficiency arise, they're often met with vague reassurances, phrases like technological superiority or fifth-generation capability. But what's the value of superiority if flight hours are cut, if pilots lack sufficient training time, and if air presence exists more on paper than in the actual sky? Then comes the issue of readiness, a factor Canada, given its harsh geography, cannot afford to overlook. At various points, the percentage of F-35s able to take off at a moment's notice has been alarmingly low. That's not just a dry technical statistic. It's a life or death question for a country defending thousands of kilometers of airspace where the weather can shift from calm to brutal within hours. A defense system where more than half the fleet risks being grounded isn't a reliable shield. It's a gamble. But cost and readiness aren't even the deepest layer of this crisis. The core and far more dangerous issue lies in control. The F-35 isn't just an aircraft, it's a closed digital platform. Its software, data, updates, even many of its critical operational functions are not under the direct control of the user nation. When Canada buys the F-35, it isn't purchasing a fully sovereign defense tool. It's entering an ecosystem where the keys are held elsewhere. In peacetime, that might be seen as an inconvenience. In a crisis, it becomes a strategic risk. Imagine a tense situation in the Arctic, where Canada needs to respond swiftly, flexibly, and independently. In that scenario, having to wait for upgrade approvals, for software tweaks, or being limited in weapons integration isn't a technical matter anymore. It's a political delay, and at times, a sovereignty paralysis. The F-35, for all its technological advantages, was born from a different philosophy of warfare. Expeditionary campaigns, vast networks of overseas bases, massive logistics, and tight coordination under a centralized command. Canada has never been that central hub, and the Arctic is certainly not the environment this model was designed to thrive in. The growing mismatch between design and real-world need becomes clearer by the day, like trying to use a precision-engineered machine to solve a problem that demands endurance, simplicity, and adaptability. And it's at this point that many in Ottawa began to realize the issue isn't whether the F-35 is good or bad. It's that it doesn't belong to Canada in the way a national defense asset must. A country may accept dependence in trade and civilian supply chains, but in defense, dependence means trading away the right to make critical decisions when they matter most. Once that realization set in, the door to a different approach began to open. If the F-35 represents a model where power comes with strings attached, then Canada needs a solution where capability comes hand in hand with control. Not a perfect system on paper, but a platform that can be adjusted, mastered, and developed according to our own needs. That's when the story turned to the Gripen, not just as an alternative, but as an escape from a decades-long cycle of technological dependency and the beginning of a new chapter where sovereignty is redefined for the digital age. If the crisis of the F-35 model forced Canada to confront the limits of dependence, then Gripen emerged as a liberating answer. But this liberation doesn't come from engine power, speed, or aerodynamic design. It comes from something more invisible, more profound, and in the 21st century, more powerful than anything else: digital technology and the ability to control it. Gripen was not built as a sealed black box. On the contrary, the core philosophy behind this program is to empower the user nation. When Canada approaches Gripen, what it truly gains access to is not just an aircraft platform, but the entire control architecture, from core software and mission systems to the ability to integrate and develop independently. This is a fundamental difference that cannot be masked by simple technical comparisons. In the era of digitized warfare, fighter jets are no longer just mechanical machines. They are airborne data processors, where algorithms, source code, and information flows determine who sees first, who reacts faster, and who makes the final decision. In that context, a nation that does not control its software is essentially handing over its security keys to someone else. Gripen turns that logic on its head. With Gripen, Canada has access to the source code, deep access to combat systems, and the ability to integrate weapons from multiple providers without being locked into a proprietary ecosystem. This is not just a technical feature, it's a quiet but decisive political shift. It allows Canada to shape its defense capabilities based on its own needs and strategic realities, not by waiting for approval or permission in moments when time is of the essence. More importantly, this control unlocks the potential for long-term learning and development. Every flight hour, every drill, every real-world scenario becomes data that Canada can use to improve its systems. The gap between operator and designer disappears. No longer dependent on upgrade packages shaped by another country's priorities, Canada transforms from a passive user into a true technological stakeholder. There's another, less discussed, but strategically vital aspect: resilience to paralysis. In a world where conflict is no longer confined to bombs and bullets but extends into cyberspace, the more a system depends on an external control center, the more vulnerable it becomes. A platform that Canada can manage, modify, and defend on its own will be more agile in the face of disruptions, whether they be technical, political, or geopolitical. The technological liberation Gripen offers is also a liberation of mindset. It forces Canada to ask a critical question. What is the purpose of our technology? And the answer is becoming increasingly clear. Our top priority isn't in distant expeditionary scenarios, but in defending our most immediate, most unforgiving, and most easily overlooked space of survival. It is precisely here that the story of technology begins to merge with the story of geography. Software control is meaningless if the platform can't survive and operate effectively in the very environment it's meant to protect. Canada may have control over the source code, but the next question is control for what purpose and where? The answer lies in the north, in those skies where ice, distance, and isolation are not exceptions, but the norm, where every design decision must withstand the tests of cold winds, short runways, and sparse infrastructure. And it's in that space where the difference becomes clear, between a platform designed for global warfare and one built to endure extreme conditions. Gripen, with its streamlined operating philosophy and high adaptability, is not just a product of open technology. It is the embodiment of a defense mindset rooted in environmental realism. When the story moves off computer screens and into the icy skies of the Arctic, Canada will face an unavoidable truth. Not every advanced aircraft belongs in every airspace, and the Arctic, more than anywhere else, will be the ultimate test of every strategic choice. The Arctic is not an abstract concept on a strategic map. For Canada, it is a vital space, the depth of our territory, a place where borders aren't marked by fences or guard posts, but by our ability to physically be there, in the skies. It's where every military theory is tested against the harshest conditions nature can throw at us. Temperatures can drop to -40, winds strike hard and without warning, visibility disappears in blizzards, runways are short, rough, sometimes just icy strips of concrete or hastily modified roads. The Arctic doesn't wait for systems that require ideal conditions. It only accepts what can survive. In this environment, the difference between the F-35 and the Gripen is no longer about high-tech versus low-tech. It's about design philosophy. The F-35 was born for a different world, a world of large bases, dense infrastructure, stable logistics chains, and massive technical crews. It's a sophisticated machine optimized for large-scale coordinated campaigns where every variable is pre-planned. But the Arctic doesn't operate that way. It is a space of uncertainty, where every sortie must be measured by survivability and the ability to return, not by the complexity of its sensors. With the F-35, every hour of operation in the north drags behind it a heavy logistical burden, complex maintenance, heavy reliance on parts and remote support systems. If just one link in that chain breaks, the entire capability can be paralyzed. In an environment where the weather can isolate a base for days, that dependency becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes a strategic liability. Gripen enters this picture with an entirely different logic. It doesn't try to conquer the Arctic with technological flash, but with cold realism. Designed from Sweden's defense philosophy, a country that also lives with long winters and harsh operating conditions, Gripen prioritizes quick takeoffs, simple maintenance, and dispersed operations. It doesn't demand pristine runways. It doesn't need an army of technicians. A small, well-trained team can keep the aircraft mission-ready even in conditions that would ground many others. That matters deeply for Canada. Our Arctic cannot be defended by a few large, vulnerable bases. It demands distributed, flexible presence, forces that can move and redeploy quickly. Gripen makes that possible. It turns small airfields, even improvised runways, into valid launching points for air defense. It blurs the line between rear and front lines, making it harder for a potential adversary to pinpoint and pressure a single center of gravity. Here, the number 88 Gripens takes on a meaning far deeper than it shows on paper. It's a force large enough to maintain constant presence, rotate crews and aircraft, and ensure the skies of the North are no longer an empty space left behind. Not through political declarations, but through physical presence, day after day, in the harshest conditions imaginable. The Arctic is also where response time is everything. When an unknown signal appears on radar, there's no room for delays caused by complex protocols or remote approvals. Gripen, with its rapid deployment and independent operation, fits this requirement exactly. It doesn't promise perfection, it promises readiness. And in territorial defense, readiness is always more valuable than glamour. It's at this point that the Arctic story leads us into another layer of analysis. When a system can operate effectively in the most unforgiving environment, when it can sustain high readiness with minimal infrastructure, the next unavoidable question becomes, what is the cost of that capability? And is Canada spending wisely on its security, or simply buying expensive symbols? Because in the end, defense isn't just a strategic matter, it's a long-term economic equation. Every flight hour, every maintenance decision, every dollar spent reflects a choice about national priorities. And when we place Gripen and the F-35 side by side in the Arctic context, the difference in operating philosophy naturally leads us to a bigger question. In the real world, where budgets are always limited, is enduring effectiveness beginning to triumph over costly sophistication? When we shift our gaze from the icy skies of the Arctic to the numbers laid out on paper, Canada's defense landscape reveals itself under a colder, but no less decisive, light. Because in the end, strategy cannot exist apart from economics. There is no such thing as an unlimited budget. No capability can be sustained if its long-term cost exceeds the nation's capacity to bear it. And it is precisely at this intersection of security and finance that the difference between the F-35 and Gripen becomes too stark to ignore. Every flight hour is not just time in the air. It's fuel costs, maintenance bills, spare parts, manpower, and opportunity costs. With the F-35, every takeoff comes with an invoice, large enough to put any long-term training plan on shaky ground. When operational costs are so high that flight hours must be cut, the price paid isn't just financial, it's human. Pilots fly less, gain experience more slowly, and lose the reflexes needed in high-pressure moments. An air force that exists on paper but lacks constant sharpening weakens itself without an enemy ever needing to act. Gripen flips that logic with calculated simplicity. Lower operating costs aren't a secondary detail, they're the foundation of a sustainable defense philosophy. When each flight hour is more affordable, Canada can keep pilots in the air more often, train more consistently, and maintain a stronger, more visible presence over its own skies. Efficiency here isn't some abstract metric. It's the real ability to project strength over time, day after day, year after year, without draining the national budget. There's a dangerous illusion in modern defense policy that power must be complex and expensive, but military history often proves the opposite. The systems that endure and win over time are the ones a nation can maintain, repair, and operate without sacrificing its other societal priorities. With Gripen, the economic equation is no longer a burden, it becomes a lever. The money saved doesn't disappear, it's reallocated into infrastructure, into people, into the capacity to adapt to threats that have yet to fully form. Over the decades-long lifespan of a fighter program, the cost difference is no longer measured in millions, but in tens of billions of dollars. That's hospitals that could be built, schools that could be funded, roads that could be maintained, and northern bases that could be upgraded. A well-managed defense program isn't in conflict with social welfare. It complements it. And that harmony is what creates a sustainable political foundation for national security. Economic efficiency also carries a deeper meaning: autonomy. A system that's too expensive will always keep a government on the defensive, forced to justify, delay, or cut back. A cost-effective system allows governments to act with confidence, to adjust strategy when needed without fear of fiscal collapse. In an unstable world, financial flexibility is itself a form of defense capability. But when it comes to defense economics, the story doesn't stop at operating costs or budget savings. There's a deeper layer where money meets memory, and cold numbers touch wounds that have never fully healed in the national psyche, because every major procurement decision in Canada carries the shadow of the past. Somewhere in our history, there was a project that once stood for ambition, intelligence, and total self-reliance. A project that wasn't buried because it was weak, but because Canada chose the easier, more dependent path. The memory of the Avro Arrow isn't just the story of a canceled aircraft. It's the symbol of a moment when Canada walked away from control over its own defense industry. And it's here, once the economic equation has been solved in favor of sustainability, that the next question becomes unavoidable. Will today's choice help Canada avoid repeating the mistake of 1959? Can a decision that appears purely technical and financial become the turning point that finally begins to heal a national wound more than half a century old? The answer doesn't lie in cost per flight hour. It lies in what Canada does with the value that remains. And to truly understand that, we must return to the past, to the Avro Arrow, and to the story of an industry once lost, but perhaps, this time, standing on the edge of rebirth. There are collective memories that never truly fade, even after decades have passed. They lie dormant in a nation's subconscious, waiting for the right moment to rise again. For Canada, Avro Arrow is one such memory. More than just a canceled fighter program, it was the moment a country severed its own path toward mastering defense industry capability, and then spent the next half-century living with a quiet, unshakable sense of loss. In 1959, Avro Arrow was not merely an ambitious project. It was proof that Canada once stood at the forefront of global military aviation, a pioneering design, a growing ecosystem of engineers, factories, and supply chains. And then, in a single political decision, it all collapsed. Over 14,000 engineers lost their jobs overnight. Some of the brightest minds were forced to leave the country, taking their knowledge and expertise to the United States, where they helped build NASA and other nations' space programs. Canada didn't just lose a plane. It lost the belief that it could control its own defense future. Since then, every major procurement has carried the shadow of the arrow. Every time Canada chooses to buy a foreign system, an unspoken question resurfaces. Is this a practical decision, or another repetition of the dependency habits forged half a century ago? Too often, we've taken the easier, cheaper short-term path at the cost of long-term capability. That's why the Gripen Agreement carries meaning far beyond the military realm. It's not just about buying jets, it's about restructuring Canada's role in the defense value chain. Final assembly on Canadian soil isn't just symbolic. It's a statement that the highest value parts of production, knowledge, skills, integration, and upgrade capability will no longer be located beyond our borders. When Canadian engineers are directly involved in maintaining, upgrading, and evolving the system, they're not just supporting an existing platform, they're building capacity for the next generation. Every software update, every tactical improvement becomes an accumulation of intellectual property. It's the promise Avro Arrow once made and was never allowed to fulfill. Job commitments, engine assembly lines, and satellite enterprise ecosystems aren't just short-term economic perks. They are the foundation of an industry that can stand on its own, flexible enough to adapt to future strategic shifts. For the first time in decades, Canada is no longer watching from the sidelines as military technology evolves. It is stepping back in as an active participant. More important than any contract, however, is the shift in mindset. A country that controls its own defense industry thinks differently about security. It decides faster, with more confidence, less beholden to external political calculations. The wound of Avro Arrow may never fully vanish, but it can be healed through action by proving that Canada has learned the costly lesson of its past. Yet no defense industry exists in a vacuum. Domestic capacity only matters when placed within a broader web of aligned interests, where nations share common strategic values. And it's here that the industrial story begins to expand into one of geopolitics. Canada isn't rebuilding its capabilities to stand alone. The choice of Gripen naturally draws it closer to nations with similar defense philosophies: Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. Countries that understand the value of autonomy, of right-sized defense industries, and of agility in an increasingly unpredictable security environment. This isn't the birth of a new opposing bloc, it's a sign of maturity in how Canada positions itself among allies. As Canada steps beyond the role of mere buyer, its voice in alliance structures also evolves, more equal, more substantive, less dependent on a single command center. And that's the quiet but vital shift, from a country seeking guarantees to one contributing to strategic balance. From the buried legacy of Avro Arrow to the future of Gripen being assembled on Canadian soil, this is more than a historical loop. It's a course correction. And as domestic industrial capability begins to harmonize with new strategic linkages in the north, Canada is entering a new phase, where geopolitics is no longer a story of dependency, but one of conscious choices and strategic maturity. Canada's defense pivot, when viewed from the outside, might be mistaken for a technical adjustment or an internal procurement decision. But within the broader geopolitical picture, it reflects a quiet but ongoing process of strategic maturity. Canada is not abandoning its traditional alliances, but it is no longer content with playing a passive role in structures shaped by others' priorities. The decision to choose Gripen and everything that comes with it signals that Canada is learning to stand more firmly on its own feet while still holding fast to essential partnerships. The Northern Alliance isn't a new military bloc with banners and bombastic declarations. It is emerging from shared geography and common strategic concerns. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Canada all face the same cold frontiers, the same challenges of defending vast, sparsely populated territories that are increasingly drawing the attention of global powers. In this context, security isn't built on shows of force, but on the ability to endure, to sustain, and to cooperate over the long haul. Gripen has become the glue connecting these nations, not just because of its technical specs, but because of the philosophy it represents, a philosophy that values autonomy, flexibility, and adaptability over reliance on centralized systems. When Canada joins this cooperative network, it does so not as a customer, but as a capable contributor. Shared training, tactical data exchange, collaborative maintenance, and joint technological development are no longer theoretical ideas. They become operational realities. This gives Canada a different kind of standing within NATO, not one of opposition or detachment, but one of balance. A country that can effectively defend its own airspace enters negotiations with greater confidence. Canada is no longer merely a beneficiary of the collective security umbrella. It is helping to reinforce that umbrella from a critical strategic direction, the North. In a world that is becoming increasingly fragmented, where supply chains are weaponized and technology becomes a tool of political pressure, reducing singular dependency is a wise form of risk management. Canada is not turning its back on the United States, but it is also not placing the entirety of its security future behind one locked door. Diversifying partnerships, especially with nations that share similar strategic thinking, helps Canada mitigate risk and expand its range of options. Strategic maturity is also reflected in Canada's acceptance of a difficult truth. National security cannot be guaranteed by political promises alone. It requires tangible capabilities, real presence, and the ability to act independently when necessary. The Northern Alliance makes no guarantees of perfect protection, but it creates a web of trust, where each nation understands both its limitations and its responsibilities. At a deeper level, this marks a change in how Canada sees its own role on the global stage. From a country that often sought reassurance from others, Canada is gradually becoming a proactive agent in shaping its regional security environment, not by imposing its will, but by building capacity, sharing burdens, and contributing in meaningful ways. The Northern Alliance, then, is not a final destination. It is a signpost along a journey in which Canada learns to combine autonomy with cooperation, national interest with alliance responsibility. And it is in that delicate but necessary balance that Canada is beginning to find its true image in the 21st century, no longer someone else's shadow, nor an outsider on the sidelines, but a nation confident enough to choose a security path that fits its own realities. As the debates quiet down, as budget figures, technical specs, and strategic maps are folded away, what remains from this decision isn't just a specific aircraft, it's a redefinition of how Canada sees itself. In the 21st century, sovereignty is no longer a slogan repeated in speeches or buried in thick policy documents. Sovereignty is the ability to act. It is the power to decide when, where, and how a nation defends its interests, without waiting for permission from anyone else. 88 Gripen fighters are not a challenge to the world, nor are they a rejection of the alliances that have shaped Canada for decades. They are a mature choice, rooted in a deep understanding of Canada's geography, its history, and its very real limits. Canada isn't chasing spectacle. It's not pursuing expensive symbols of power. It's choosing a path that's more pragmatic, more resilient, and most importantly, sustainable over the long term. This decision speaks to a simple but powerful truth. Security cannot be fully outsourced. Technology can be bought, but capability must be built. By reclaiming control over its software, its maintenance chains, and its defense industry, Canada hasn't just purchased additional defensive capacity. It has bought time, flexibility, and political space to shape its own security future in an increasingly unstable world. There will be criticism. Endless comparisons will be made about specifications, about standing in alliances, about what Canada could have chosen but didn't. But history rarely judges a decision by what it didn't do. History looks at the consequences it created. And perhaps the most important consequence of this decision is that Canada has begun to shed a long-standing posture of dependency, stepping into a more confident, more proactive phase of its national story. The Arctic won't wait. Strategic competition isn't slowing down. Geopolitical shocks will keep coming, usually when we're least prepared. In that context, Canada's choice doesn't promise absolute safety, but it delivers something far more critical: the ability to respond, to adapt, and to stand firm when old assumptions collapse. In the end, this story isn't just about Gripen or the F-35. It's about a country learning how to make difficult decisions, choices that may not always be popular, but are necessary for the road ahead. And because of that, this conversation isn't over. It needs more perspectives, sharper questions, and honest input from you. If you have your own thoughts on Canada's defense choices, on sovereignty, or on the path this country should take in the new century, leave a comment below. And if you want to keep following, analyzing, and unpacking the geopolitical shifts shaping our world, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next video, because understanding today's world is the best way to prepare for tomorrow.